Hello everyone, I am Chayoung Lee. As you know, I've already finished the first book, A Single Shard, and definitely prepared the second book for you. Well, giving you some clues about the second one, it is closely related to the young lady with gorgeous appearance and the other two guys who makes love triangle with her. One man is very gentle and sweet, but the other is such a charismatic person. The heroine adores the former at first, but as time goes by, she realizes the latter's real worth while getting through the vortex of American history. Well, are the hints too extensive? If you want to know the title of a new book, please wait some more days looking forward to it. Anyway, the other day I've told you that among my listeners, some are get accustomed to listening records over than 10 minutes and others are not. So whenever I updated the new records, I've divided all the chapters into 2 or 3 pieces and after then combined all the parts into one episode again. And we've shared 1, 8, and 11 chapter with you so far. At last, it's the very day we finally listened 3 chapters all at once. Wow! It will take considerable time for the record to be ended, and it is a very good chance to test how much you can understand with such a long English script. Of course, it is very hard to endure the whole running time, but never push the stop button until you can imagine the whole story naturally. Remember, not understand perfectly, but just imagine the story. You got it? Well then, hopping that book talk English would be totally instructive for every listeners. Let's start a single shot last combination episode. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. A small village on the west coast of Korea, mid to late 12th century. Chapter 1. The well-fed of the village greeted each other politely by saying, "Have you eaten well today?" Three-Ear and his friend turned the greeting inside out for their own little joke. Three-Ear squeezed the birching pouch that he wore at his waist. He had meant to hold back the good news, but the excitement spit out of him. "Great man, a good thing that you greeted me so just now, for later today we'll have to use the proper words." He held the bag high. Three-Ear was delighted when Crayman's eye widened in surprise. He knew that Crayman would guess at once. Only one thing could give a bag that kind of smooth fullness. "Come, my young little friend, tell me how you came by such a fortune." "A tale worth hearing, no doubt." Three-Ear had been trotting along the road on his early morning perusal of the village rubbish heaps. Ahead of him, a man carried a heavy load on a jjigae, open frame package made of branches. On the jjigae was a large woven straw container, the kind commonly used to carry rice. Three-Ear knew that the rice must be from last year's crop. In the fields surrounding the village, this season's rice had only just begun to grow. It would be many months before the rice was harvested, and the poor allowed to glean the fallen grain from the bare fields. Only then would they taste the pure flavor of rice and feel its solid goodness in their bellies. Just looking at the straw box made water rush into Three-Ear's mouth. As Three-Ear started, the rice began to trickle out of a hole in the straw box. The trickle thickened and became a stream. Obviously, the man continued on his way. For a few short moments, 3 ears thought wrestle with one another. Tell him, quickly, before he loses too much rice. No, don't say anything. You'll be able to pick up the fallen rice before he rounds the bend. 3 ear made his decision. He waited until the man had reached the bend in the road, then went to catch him. Honorable sir, 3 ear said, panting and bowing. As I walked behind you, I noticed that you're marking your path with rice. The farmer turned and saw the tray of rice. A well-built man with a broad sun-tanned face, he pushed his straw hat back, scratched his head, and laughed ruefully. Impatience, said the farmer. I should have had this container open with a double wall, but it would have taken more time. Now I pay for not waiting a bit longer. He struggled out all the jiggy straps and inspected the container. He pulled the straw to close the gap, but to no avail, so he threw his arms up in mock despair. 3 ear grinned. He liked the farmer's easygoing nature. Fetch me a few leaves, boy, said the farmer. 3 ear complied, and the man stuffed them into the container as a temporary patch. Many thanks, kind sir. 3 ear bowed, very pleased with himself. He had made the lucky guess, and his waist pouch would soon be full with rice. 3 ear had learned from Craneman's example. Foraging in the woods and rubbish heaps, gathering fallen grain heads. These were honorable ways to garner a meal, requiring time and work. But stealing and begging, Craneman said, made the man no better than a dog. Work gives a man dignity, stealing takes away, he often said. Following Craneman's advice was not always easy for 3 ear. Today, for example, was stealing too weighty as 3 ear had for more rice too far before alerting the man that his rice bag was leaking? Did a good deed balance a bad one? 3 ear often pondered these kinds of questions, alone or in discussion with Craneman. Such questions solved in 2 ways. Craneman had explained. They keep a man's mind sharp, and his thoughts off his empty stomach. Now, as always, he seemed to know 3 ear's thoughts without hearing them spoken. Tell me about this farmer, he said. What kind of man was he? 3 ear considered the question for several moments, stirring his memory. At last he answered, one who lacks patience. He said it himself. He had not wanted to wait for a sturdier container to be built, and he could not be bothered to pick up the fallen rice. 3 ear paused, but he laughed easily even at himself. If we were here now and hear you tell of waiting a little longer before speaking, what do you think he would say or do? He would laugh, 3 ear said, surprising himself with the speed of his response. Then more slowly, I think he would not have minded. Craneman nodded, satisfied. And 3 ear thought of something his friend often said. Scholars read the great words of the word, but you and I must learn to read the word itself. 3 ear was called after the mushroom that grew in winkle-half circles on dead or fallen tree trunk, emerging from the rotten wood with a benefit of parent seed. A good name for an orphan, Craneman said. If ever 3 year had had another name, he no longer remembered it, nor the family that might have named him so. 3 years shared the space under the bridge with Craneman, or rather, Craneman shared it with him. After all, Craneman had been there first, and would not be leaving any time soon. The shriveled and twisted cough and food he had been born with made sure of that. 3 years knew the story of his friend's name. When they saw my leg at first, it was thought I would not survive it. Craneman said, then as I went through life on one leg, it was said that it was like a crane. But besides standing on one leg, cranes are also a symbol of a long life. True enough, Craneman added. He had outlived all his family and, unable to work, had been forced to sell his possessions one by one, including at last the roof over his head. Thus it was that he had come to live under the bridge. Once a year or so earlier, 3 years had asked him how long he had lived there. Craneman shook his head. He no longer remembered, but then he brightened and hobbled over to one side of the bridge. I do not remember how long I have been here, he said, but I know how long you have. And he pointed upward to the under side of the bridge. I wonder that I have not shown you this before. Chapter 8. Min began work on another setup in late basis. But before the drawing was complete, the emissary ship docked. Emissary Kim sent messengers to ask if any of the porters have anything new to show. Min waved the messenger away without a word. The next morning, the news spread through the village like a sudden sea breeze. The emissary had visited Kang's house. Kang had been chosen for the commission. Later that morning, 3 years swept up the remains of the destroyed bases in Min's yard. It was as he had guessed. Out of the pieces bore traces of brown crowded glaze. 3 years felt numb with disappointment. He wondered how much worse it must be for Min. The porter had still not come out of the house with instructions for the days, so 3 years turned to the vegetable patch. He squatted it down and began to pull the first of 1,000 nauseous shoots that threatened the cucumber plant so precious to Min's wife. Someone called out from the front of the house. 3 years recognized the voice of the government official Lee. Pardon me. The emissary is here. He wishes to speak with you. 3 years dropped the ragweed he was holding and stole around to the window at the side of the house. He could see little but heard everything. Min welcomed Emissary Kim, and the man of the royal courtesan to his home. They sat around a low table in silence. 3 years heard a clink of pottery as Min's wife served tea. Then Emissary Kim began to speak. This evening work of your colleagues. It is something new and will be of a great interest to the court. There was a pause. 3 years imagined Min nodding in polite agreement. I will speak with no veil over my thoughts, pardon me. Other aspects of Potter Gang's work are, how can I say it, not as much to my taste. Kang has been given what I will call a limited commission, who will produce work for a court for a year to see if it pleases His Majesty. Kim hesitated, then continued. I would far rather have given you the honor of a royal commission, but I would be remiss in my responsibilities if I were to ignore this new technique. It must be presented to the court. I will now return to Songdo, but if you were to produce something using this innate style and bring it to me in Songdo, I would guarantee a careful consideration of the work. Three-Ear could barely contain his excitement. The charge! He wanted to shout. Show him the pieces from the rubbish heap. He's an expert. He would understand about the firing. But Min was speaking now. The royal emissary honors me with his words, and I wish to disappoint no one. But I am an old man now. I could not possibly make the journey to Songdo. I thank the emissary for his consideration and beg his understanding for my failure. Three-Ear heard the swish of fine heavy fabric as the emissary rose to his feet and went to the door. The emissary spoke once more. It is my wish that you find a way somehow and put him in. It would be a great sorrow to me if this were to be the last time I saw your fine work. Then he and his entourage were gone. Three-Ear turned and slid down the wall, slumped over with his head in his hands. The old fool, he thought. He does not wish the emissary to see the imperfect glaze. His pride kept him from a royal commission. The fool. Just then, Min's wife came around the house with a basket of laundry. Three-Ear jumped to his feet to help her. She nodded her thanks, calm as ever, as if the tumultuous event of the past few days had never happened. They stood on either side of the clothesline. He handed her the garments, and she hung them. Her serenity and the rhythm of the task helped soothe Three-Ear's raw nerves. Yet again, he wished he could think of a way to show his gratitude for her kindness. What was it she wanted? He wondered. She seemed to have no desire of her own, or perhaps her wishes were those of her husband. Suddenly, an answer came to Three-Ear, as if calling from the clear sky. Do him a favor, a great favor. There was a way to thank her. Her husband's success, that was what she desired. Before he could think about it any longer, he heard himself speaking. I have a request to make of the honorable Potter's wife, he said. Please, she replied. I am aware of the generous offer made by the royal emissary, he confessed, and glanced quickly at her. Her eyes crinkled in an amusement, so he knew she did not mind that he had eavesdrops. If the master make a vessel he considers worthy of the coast's attention, it would be my greatest honor to be allowed to take it to Songdo for him. Her face was partially hidden behind the linen sheet she was hanging. She fixed it firmly to the line before she answered. I will ask the master under one condition. She said. No, 2 conditions. The first is that you return to Drupo quickly and safely. Three-Ear bowed, puzzled. Why should it matter to her how he journeyed? And the second, she paused. The second is that from now on you will call me Ajima. Three-Ear's eyes filled with tears. He bent to pick up another piece of laundry. Ajima meant something like auntie. It was a term of great affection, reserved only for her kinswoman. Three-Ear was kin to no one, and yet Min's wife wished for him to call her Ajima. He did not even know if he could say the word. Well, Three-Ear? The gentle teasing had returned to her voice. Do you agree to my conditions? Three-Ear nodded. He spoke from behind the clothes that flapped on the line. I agree, he said, then faltered. His voice fell to a whisper. I agree, Asma. A few days later, Three-Ear crouched under the bridge, watching idly as Kramen shaved another silver of wood from the chopstick he was whittling. Without looking up, Kramen said, "It is too bad that your dogs are not on a string. If they were, I would have given them a good yank by now to see what I could see." Trier chewed on the inside of the cheek. He should have known it was folly to keep a secret from Kramen, even for a few days. "I will be going on a journey soon," Trier said. He meant to speak firmly, but his voice sounded loud and coarse instead. "A journey, Kramen continued whittling. "It is a good thing for a man to see the world if he can. Where would he go?" 2 days before, Min had handed Trier some tools to be cleaned, saying, "The best will be finished by midsummer. If you have done, you will be able to return before the snow." In this way, Trier learned that Min was sending him to Songdo. Since that moment, Trier had regretted the rashness of his offer. He had never once left Joppo since his arrival as a toddler. How could he possibly think of making such a journey? It would take many days, over unfamiliar mountains where they might even be a path to follow, much less a road. He might well lose his way. And who knew what puddles awaited him? Robbers, wild animals, rock slides. What had he been thinking? But then, what was he to do? Tell me. He had changed his mind. No, going to Songdo was hardly possible, but not going was worse. Min has some work that must be transported for an audience at the royal court. Kramen put down his knife, leaned back, and crossed his arms. An audience at the court? What a little talk. "My friend, why do you not say, 'I'm going to the capital, to Songdo'?" Trier swallowed. He rose to his feet and walked a few steps to the water's edge, picked up a flat stone, and threw his silver skip across the water. 4 times it lit on the surface. How was it that a stone could be so like a bird? Kramen stood too and skipped a stone of his own. 6 touches. Trier shrugged as a little smile stretched his lips. In all the year under the bridge, he had never once defeated Kramen at his game. Together they watched until the ripples from the stone had melted away. "I'm going to Songdo," Trier said at last. As if testing the words, he looked at his companion pleadingly. It seemed too far away to say it. "No, my friend," Kramen said. "It is only as far as the next village. A day's work on your long legs." Trier phoned, mystified. But before he could speak, Kramen continued. "You might know that you are going to Songdo, but you must not tell your body. It must think one hill, one belly, one day at a time. In that way, your spirit will not grow weary before you have even begun to work. One day, one village. That is how you will go, my friend." Trier watched as Kramen stirred up the water with his crutch a little. Then he raised the dripping crutch and pointed it at Trier. "I will go now. To bring me some straw. You will need some extra sandals for such a journey, and who is to make them if not I?" Min spent his time on the new set of vases, 1 or 2 of which would be selected to be taken to Songdo. In the meantime, the pace had slowed considerably for Trier. So frenetically had he worked during the time surrounding the emissary's visit that he was ahead of schedule on his work. Plenty of wood filled the shed at the campsite. Birds of clay and bowls of silver awaited Min's need. Trier found himself idle on occasion, with too much time to think. And think he did, gathering his courage, until at last there was enough of it to enable him to stand before Min with a request. "What is it now?" Min asked. Trier had lingered by the house at the end of the day, waiting for Min to look up from the wheel. "Master," Trier bowed. It is now more than a year that I have had the honor of working for you. A year. Yes, so? 3 years pulled in the muscles of the stomach to stop their creaking. I was wondering, if the master would be so good, if he thinks my work worthy. Min snapped. Ask your question or leave me in peace. If you'd one day be teaching me to make a pot. 3 years' words rushed out in a single breath. Min sat motionless for a long time. Long enough for 3 years to wonder if perhaps his request had been unclear. At last, Min stood and 3 years raised his head. Know this, orphaned one, Min said slowly. If ever you learn to make a pot, it will not be from me. 3 years could not stop himself. Why? He cried out. Why will you not teach me? Min picked up the half-formed vessel before him and slammed it back onto the wheel with such force that 3 years flinched it. Why? Min repeated. I will tell you why. The porter's voice was low, but shook with the effort of control. The porter trace goes from father to son. I had a son once, my son Hyungu. He's gone now. It is him I would have taught. You. 3 years saw the porter's eye, fierce with grief and rage. Min choked out the last words. You're not my son. Chapter 11. The path to the rock of the falling flowers was steep, and 3 years leaned forward, sometimes on all fours as he climbed. Just before he reached the top, he stopped by the side of the path and took the jjigae off his back. He drank from the gourd and poured a little water on his hands to splash on his sweaty face. Thus refreshed, he felt ready to give his full attention to the side of the rock. He walked the last incline, holding the jjigae awkwardly in front of him, and set it down once he reached the broad plateau at the top. It was as if he stood alone on the top of the world. He gazed around, this way and that, hardly knowing where to look first. Before him to the north, the creek fell away sharply to the Kum River, a broad stroke of silver, rebounding its way through the hills and plains. Behind him was the path he had climbed, with the city of Bia below. How small it looked now! 3 years shaded his eyes from the sun as it began to set, wondering if the smudge on the horizon might be the sea. Surely the creek was high enough to see all the way there. Craneman's words came to life. The king standing where 3 years stood now, surrounded by the palace women. The enemy scrambling up the path he had just followed. The cries of the women, their terror and their sudden act of bravery, their colored dresses like the petals of thousands of flowers. You know the story, huh? The voice at his side started to 3 years. He felt his heart leap and run. He had not heard the man come up the path, but there he stood, poorly dressed and oddly pale, as if he had been ill for a long time, or never went outdoors when the sun shone. 3 years cleared his throat. Greetings, sir. Have you eaten well today? Not today. Not for a few days now, came the impolite answer. The man smiled, but 3 years did not like his smile. There was something unpleasant behind it. Although he would have preferred to stay at the rock a while longer, he decided to descend rather than remain in unwanted company. 3 years turned and picked up his jjigae, preparing to hoist it to his back. Let me help you with that, the man said, moving forward. A fine load of rice indeed. 3 years stepped back, trying to quell his alarm. His cargo was far more precious than rice. Your offer is kind, good sir, but I have no need of help. The man's smile turned into a leer. Now, There's a rude boy. My help is no good to you. And reached out with one arm to grab the jjigae. Trier jerked it away from him. He stumbled, coming dangerously near the edge of the cliff. The man snarled, menacing and ugly, and advanced a few steps. He seized the side of the straw container with both hands and pulled. In the last moment, everything had come together in Trier's mind. The man's patter, his rudeness, his coming upon Trier in such a deserted place. He was one of the dreaded Dodong, the bandits who hid throughout the countryside and on the outskirts of the cities, emerging only to rob weary travelers. Trier held on to the wooden frame of jjigae with all his might. The rover pulled and jerked. Crane and saw his straw work out. At one point the man released one hand, cursing. The straw had cut into his palm. Trier's hands were toughened by carrots from axe and spade, his arms strengthened by endless work. He gave not a single step of ground to the rover. "Be careful!" A scream of warning sounded in Trier's head. "You're pulling so hard. If you let go suddenly, you will fall. Move now, so your back is not to the cliff edge." Trier shifted his feet and began edging sideways. Still the rover pulled, now shouting curses and threats with every breath. Soon Trier's back was to the path. His hands and arms felt like iron. They would never break. He would never let go. The rover was weakening. He could feel it. Trier stared into the rover's face. Hatred would give him more strength. And it did too. Silently, he swore to himself that his doggone man would never win the jjigae with his priceless contents. The man stared back at him, his face contorted in an evil grimace. But suddenly he laughed and released the container. Trier collapsed backwards into the arms of another man who had stolen up the path behind him, a second rover. Against two, Trier could do nothing. The second man pinned his arms back while the first strode forward and wrenched the jjigae away. Trier kicked and struggled. His head crashed into the chin of his captor, who swore in pain. The other rover reached out and slapped Trier's face viciously. "Stop your struggle, worthless one," he said. "We mean only to rob you, but it would not be past us to harm you if you prove too much trouble." While his companion kept Trier pinioned, the first rover quickly opened the straw container. He threw aside the packing with straw and silk, growing angrier with each handful. "Not rice. What is it you're carrying, idiot boy?" At last, he drew out the first of the vases, and his face grew purple with fury. "Useless!" he screamed, gripping the mouth of the vase with one hand and waving about. Trier caught his breath with fear. "We might set it," said the second rover more calmly. "Have you no eyes in your head?" His companion shouted back. "Look at it. Can't you see this could only be a gift for the palace? Nobody would dare buy it from us." "Keep looking. Perhaps there is something more." The rover set the first vase down on the ground and returned to his search of the container. With more muttered curses, he pulled out the second vessel and threw a final handful of straw on the ground. "Nothing!" he screamed. "All the way up this hill, and nothing!" His companion had shifted his grip and now had one arm across Trier's throat. Throttling him so he could barely breathe. With his other hand he pulled roughly at Trier's waist pouch. Here is something to cheer you up." He had the pouch in his free hand and emptied the contents onto the ground. The flintstone and the little crate total fell out, followed by the string of the coins. "Something, anyway," grumbled the first robber, scooping up the coins. He kicked the jjigae out of his way, and headed down the path. Come, we've wasted enough time here. Trier breathed a silent prayer of thanks. Take the money. Take anything. Just leave the vases alone. The second mover left. Wait, he said. Come hold this donkey for a moment. The first robber retraced his step. What is it? He asked impatiently, grabbing Trier by the arms from behind. A little fun, as long as we are up here. The robber picked up one of the vases. He stepped to the edge of the cliff and flung it into the air. Peering over the edge, he put his hand to his ear in a pose of listening. After an agony of silence, the crash of pottery was heard on the rocks far below. The second robber laughed again. One more, he said in a jovial voice. No! Trier screamed, an inhuman screech of utter desperation. The robber, heard him, lifted him off his feet and slammed him to the ground so hard that his breath left him. And Trier could only watch it as the second vase sailed through the air. With a yelp like a wounded dog, he put his hands over his ears so he would not hear the crash. Trier rolled onto his side and vomited. He retched again and again, until his stomach felt as empty as a spirit. Shakily, he rose to his feet and bent over double, his hands on his knees. Failure, the most dishonorable failure. He had been unable to keep the vases safe, but he was not even halfway to Songdo. If he had reached his destination, and the work had been rejected by the court, at least he would have done his part. He raised his head slowly and stared at the edge of the cliff. The thought of returning to Min with this news, and his whole body shuddered. Nothing could be worse. He straightened up and took a few steps toward the edge. What would it be like to live up and sail through the air as those women had? Like flying, like a bird, so free. And time would feel different. Those few moments would be like hours, surely. But just then, he heard Kramer's voice so clearly that he turned in surprise. Leaping into death is not the only way to show true courage. No one was there, of course. Trier stepped back from the edge, ashamed. He knew it was true. It would take far more courage to face Min. He thought of his promise to Ajma, and besides, Kramer was waiting for him. It was his duty to return. He picked up his waist pouch and put the flintstones and the tote bag inside. Then he untied a few items from the jjigae. There was one pair of sandals. He had done the other spare pair the day before. The food bag still held a few rice cakes, but Trier felt that he would never be able to eat again. He tucked the pouch bag under his tunic and slung the sandals, the food bag and the drinking gourd over one shoulder. Then he stood for a few moments staring at nothing. Gradually, the empty straw container came into focus before him. With a sudden cry of fury, Trier picked up the jjigae and threw it, container and all, over the edge of the cliff. He watched its descent. It did not fall cleanly to the water, but bounced several times off the rocks on its way down. Trier turned and began to run. He ran blindly down the mountain path, heedless of the rocks and shrub. Several times he felt but was on his feet again in the next breath, stumbling, tripping, skidding in a headlong descent. When at last he reached the point where the path leveled out, he fell hard onto his face, the dirt mixing with his tears. His teeth cut into his top lip, and he spat blood. The pain was welcome. He deserved far worse. Trier sat up and wiped his face with the edge of his tunic, hearing nothing but the sound of his own panting and the rushing river nearby. Suddenly, a last flicker of hope flared within him. The second vase, he had not heard the crash. Perhaps it had fallen into the water. Perhaps it was still unbroken. Trier made his way around the base of the cliff to the river. Boulders blocked the way to a narrow strip of the sand with more rocks beyond. He looked up the sheer face of the cliff as it rose right above him and tried to guess where the base might have fallen. Then he began scrambling over the boulders. Thorny shrubs grew among the rocks. Sometimes they messed into a wall so thick that he had to scramble down to the water's edge and wait to make further progress. If the vases had fallen among those shrubs, he would never be able to find them. That small mass on the sand up ahead, not as dark as the rocks. Could that be a vase? Trier made his awkward way over the stony ground, barking his shin once, but hardly feeling the pain in his eagerness. No, a pile of pebbles. For a long time, he made his way back and forth between the cliff and the river, up and down over the rocks and sand. He had nearly given up hope when he came upon a little mound of shards. They would never have been noticed by a casual passerby. So thoroughly smashed was the vessel that the fragments were no bigger than pebbles. Trier crouched and touched them gingerly. The first vase he hopped with all his might. He stood and looked around. The thief had thrown both vases from the same spot on the cliff. The other one should be somewhere nearby. At the river's edge, Trier saw something on the sand. He approached it slowly, telling himself it was probably not a pile of pebbles or a piece of driftwood. It was a second vase. The first of his fall had driven it into the sand, in 100 pieces. Trier dropped to his knees. Fool, he thought bitterly. Fool, to hope that it could have survived such a fall. The second vase, its fur cushioned however slightly by the sand, had broken into bigger pieces. The largest shard was the size of his palm. Trier picked up this piece and swished it through the water to rinse off the sand. Across one side of the shard went a shallow groove, evidence of the vase's melon shape. Part of an inlaid peony blossom with its stem and leaves twined along the groove, and the glaze still shone clear and pure, untouched by the violence that had just been done it. A sharp edge of the shard bit into Trier's palm. The pain was an echo. He remembered now. It was when he had thrown the shard from the first batch of the ruined vases into the river in Drupo. How long ago it seemed! Suddenly, Trier raised his head. He stood up and squared his shoulders, still clutching the piece of pottery. He laid the shard carefully on a flat stone. He took the clay turtle from his waist pouch and squeezed it back into a ball. Next, he rolled the clay between his palm until it formed a long snake. Picking up the shard again, he pinched the snake all the way round the sharp edge to protect it. Trier removed the flint stone from his waist pouch. They must scratch the shard. He tied them into one corner of his tunic, then put the clay-bound shard into the pouch. Holding the pouch clear of the boulders with one hand, he climbed back to the path. His every movement was quick with purpose. To hesitate was too tough. He had made up his mind. He would journey on to Songdo and show the emissary the single shard.